The presiding judge began the court session by harshly condemning the prosecuting lawyer for presenting a false witness in the previous session, emphasizing the importance of truth in the justice system. The prosecuting lawyer accepted full responsibility, apologized, and promised to revise his vetting procedures for witnesses moving forward. Despite the previous misstep, the prosecutor sought to introduce a new key witness, a Nigerian police officer, claiming he had crucial information against the defendant, Simon Ekpa. Simon Ekpa, a trained lawyer himself, asked to cross-examine the witness before any formal testimony, arguing the need to verify the authenticity of the witness due to prior issues with credibility. During cross-examination, Simon Ekpa exposed inconsistencies in the witness identification, an outdated ID card, lack of a current warrant card, and failure to meet standard police identification procedures. Seizing on the doubts raised, Simon Ekpa's lawyer accused the prosecution of repeatedly failing to properly vet witnesses and requested the judge suspend any further witness presentations by the prosecution. The judge demanded clarification on the verification process used for the witness and warned the prosecuting team that future lapses in witness credibility would result in suspension from the case. The prosecutor claimed he had relied on Nigerian authorities for witness selection and promised more rigorous checks moving forward, trying to shift some blame to Nigerian officials. Despite the earlier credibility issues, the witness testified that Simon Ekpa's social media posts incited villagers in Nigeria to protest and attack government property, citing interviews and evidence gathered. Despite the witness testimony, the major damage to his credibility and the prosecution's repeated errors led to visible relief and joy on Simon Ekpa's side, indicating strong courtroom momentum in his favor. In court, Simon Ekpa's lawyer exposed flaws in the testimony of a police officer, revealing that the officer was not a social media expert, lacked direct evidence of incitement, had no recordings of key witness interviews, and admitted that villagers might have acted on pre-existing grievances rather than Simon Ekpa's social media post. The police officer acknowledged that Simon Ekpa was not present at the scene, did not directly instruct violence, and that merely sharing and discussing posts isn't criminal. The officer could not prove coordination or incitement beyond speculative interpretation. The presiding judge reprimanded the prosecution for bringing unprepared and unconvincing witnesses to court, indicating that the case against Simon Ekpa might be weak and suggesting that Simon Ekpa could be innocent. Simon Ekpa's second courtroom win sparked emotional reactions and tears of joy from supporters. The public and media are eagerly awaiting the next session, which is expected to be one of the most crucial hearings in the case. It was a chilly morning in Finland, the kind where breath floats visibly in the air and the sun hangs low in the sky. But inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation, tension, and unspoken questions. For Simon Njoku Ekpa, a trained lawyer, political activist, and controversial figure of Nigerian origin, this was not just another court appearance. It was a defining moment. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal professionals and journalists, but with supporters, curious onlookers, and members of the Nigerian diaspora in Finland who had followed the case from its earliest days. The heavy doors of the courtroom had barely closed when the presiding judge addressed the court with a stern, unwavering voice that cut through the silence like a blade. Right from the beginning, the judge did not mince words. With a measured tone filled with restrained anger, the judge directed his comments toward the prosecuting lawyer. The judge criticized him for what he called a disgraceful violation of the justice system. the presentation of a false witness in the previous court session. This was not merely a procedural error, it was a breach of ethical and legal expectations, and it struck at the very heart of what the court stands for. The judge reminded everyone in the room, in no uncertain terms, that truth must form the foundation of every legal process. Justice, he said, could never flourish in an environment polluted with dishonesty. The prosecuting lawyer, visibly shaken and perhaps overwhelmed by the judge's direct condemnation, did not try to defend his previous actions. He stood with bowed head and admitted his fault. He accepted full responsibility for the mishap, apologized to the court, and gave his word that his future witness vetting procedures would be more thorough and transparent. There was a somberness in his voice, a recognition that the court had lost a measure of confidence in his ability to present credible evidence. But even after acknowledging his error, the prosecuting lawyer surprised the court by requesting to introduce a new key witness. This new witness, the prosecution claimed, was a police officer from the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The prosecutor described him as someone who had critical information concerning the case against Simon Nyoku Ekpa. According to the prosecutor, this officer could draw a connection between Simon Nyoku Ekpa's social media activities and acts of civil unrest in Nigeria. The weight of this claim was immense. If true, it could turn the tide of the case. But given the damage already done to the prosecution's credibility, the courtroom responded with skepticism rather than curiosity. Simon Nyoku Ekpa, who had remained calm throughout the judge's remarks and the prosecutor's apology, stood up and made a request. He asked the court for the opportunity to cross-examine the proposed witness before any formal testimony was accepted into the record. As a trained lawyer himself, Simon Nyoku Ekpa argued that it was essential to verify the authenticity of this new witness, especially in light of the previous incident involving a false witness. His argument was rooted in logic. If the court could be misled once, it must take extra care to avoid being misled again. The judge allowed the cross-examination to proceed, and what followed was a methodical and at times uncomfortable unraveling of the prosecution's case. Under questioning, the witness, the Nigerian police officer, presented an outdated identification card. He had no current warrant card to prove his active status in the Nigerian police force. When asked about the proper procedures for verifying his identity and qualifications, he gave responses that were inconsistent and vague. The courtroom grew more restless with each passing minute. It was becoming clear that this so-called key witness was not prepared to meet the rigorous standards of international legal proceedings. Simon Nyoku Ekpa, seizing on the growing doubt in the room, continued to question the witness with precision and restraint. He focused not only on the witness's questionable credentials, but also on the larger implications of the prosecution's methods. Was it a mere oversight, or was there something more troubling beneath the surface? A pattern of negligence, perhaps even intentional misdirection. Sensing that the tide had turned, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's legal team rose and addressed the court. They accused the prosecution of systematically failing to vet its witnesses. This was not a one-time mistake, they argued. This was a pattern that undermined the very integrity of the case. Given this, they asked the judge to suspend any further witness presentations by the prosecution until a more transparent and reliable process could be guaranteed. The judge, clearly disturbed by what he had seen and heard, asked the prosecution for a detailed explanation of their verification process. He warned them that future lapses in the credibility of their witnesses would not just weaken their case, it could lead to their suspension from the proceedings altogether. The prosecuting lawyer, now on the defensive, explained that he had relied on Nigerian authorities for selecting and vetting witnesses, He tried to shift some of the responsibility to officials back in Nigeria, suggesting that the international nature of the case made it harder to control every aspect. However, the judge was not easily swayed. He reiterated the importance of maintaining strict standards, regardless of logistical challenges. Despite all the damage to their credibility, the prosecution insisted on allowing the police officer to deliver his testimony. The officer claimed that Simon Nyoku Ekpa's social media posts had incited unrest in Nigerian villages. He pointed to interviews and other pieces of evidence supposedly gathered from the field. According to him, these posts had led to protests and attacks on government property in southeastern Nigeria. But under further scrutiny, the foundation of his claims began to crumble. When asked whether he was a social media expert, the officer admitted he was not. He had no training in analyzing online behavior, trends, or digital influence. When pressed to present direct evidence, such as video recordings, transcriptions of interviews, or forensic digital analyses, he had none. He could not even verify whether the villagers who had allegedly protested had seen Simon Nyoku Ekpa's posts firsthand, nor could he say with certainty that the posts were the sole or even primary cause of the unrest. He even acknowledged that the villagers may have acted out of long-standing grievances unrelated to anything Simon Nyoku Ekpa had posted or said. Moreover, the officer admitted that Simon Nyoku Ekpa had not been physically present at any of the protest scenes. He did not instruct anyone to commit violence. The most he had done was share or comment on issues affecting southeastern Nigeria, a right that many would argue falls squarely within the bounds of free speech. The courtroom sat in a kind of stunned silence. What had been presented as a decisive testimony turned out to be filled with speculative interpretations and vague connections. The judge had heard enough. With unmistakable frustration, he reprimanded the prosecution for once again bringing an unprepared and unconvincing witness to the courtroom. He did not explicitly declare Simon Nyoku Ekpa innocent at that moment, but his tone left little doubt about how weak the case had become. The suggestion hung in the air like a whispered truth. Perhaps Simon Nyoku Ekpa was not guilty after all. Perhaps the entire case had been driven more by politics than by law. As the judge concluded the day's session, the courtroom seemed to exhale all at once. There were tears of relief, joy, vindication from supporters of Simon Nyoku Ekpa. Some had followed his case from the very beginning, believing in his innocence. Others had been more cautious, but were moved by what they had seen and heard. Simon Nyoku Ekpa himself, who had remained composed throughout the session, showed rare emotion. His eyes welled up, and for a moment his usual stoicism gave way to something more vulnerable, more human. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. Reporters called their editors, live streams buzzed with excitement, and social media platforms lit up with posts. For many people in the Nigerian community, both at home and abroad, this courtroom victory was more than just a legal milestone. It was symbolic. It represented the idea that truth, when properly defended, could still win in a world often clouded by misinformation, politics, and institutional pressure. And so, as the day drew to a close and the courthouse slowly emptied, one thing was clear. Simon Nyoku Ekpa had secured his second major courtroom victory in Finland. But more than that, he had regained control of the narrative that had once threatened to define him. With every tear, with every cheer, and with every headline, the message was clear. Justice, though slow and sometimes imperfect, had not failed him yet. The next court session, already being described as the most crucial phase of the trial, was expected to attract even greater attention. The prosecution, bruised and exposed, would need to regroup and re-evaluate their entire strategy. Simon Nyoku Ekpa's legal team, emboldened by their recent success, would likely press for an outright dismissal of the case. And for the watching world, the courtroom drama in Finland had become something far more profound, a test of legal ethics, international cooperation, and the fine line between free speech and incitement. In the days that followed, commentators, legal experts, and journalists dissected every detail of the hearing. In Nigeria, radio hosts debated the implications. Was Simon Nyoku Ekpa a misunderstood freedom advocate or a dangerous provocateur? In Finland, the case sparked new conversations about how international legal systems should handle cases involving foreign political activism. Could foreign governments pressure domestic courts? And how much weight should be given to evidence produced by foreign law enforcement agencies? Simon Nyoku Ekpa himself remained cautious in his public statements. While grateful for the court's ruling, he emphasized that the legal journey was not yet over. He called for patience, dignity, and above all, faith in due process. For his part, he seemed determined not to let the courtroom drama overshadow his broader political and humanitarian work. But even he could not ignore the significance of what had just happened. "Victory! Victory!" they had cried, his supporters chanting outside the courthouse under the pale Finnish sky. And for now, that victory was real. Simon Nyoku Ekpa had stood before the court, stared down falsehood, and emerged not only unbroken, but stronger. And so the story continues. One man, many voices, and a courtroom where the truth, however long delayed, is still possible. As the week progressed following the court session in Finland, the ripple effects of Simon Nyoku Ekpa's victory continued to spread across continents. In the heart of Helsinki, where the courthouse had become an unexpected epicenter of global legal and political attention, people gathered in small groups to discuss the implications of what had just transpired. Journalists from Nigeria, Finland, the United Kingdom, and several parts of the European Union huddled outside the court complex, giving live updates, pre-recorded analysis, and long-form podcast segments. Television anchors described it as a moment that tested the resilience of international law and the importance of fair representation, especially for politically active immigrants. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the streets of southeastern towns like Enugu, Abakaliki, Owerri, Onitsha, and Aba buzzed with excitement. Although the court proceedings were taking place thousands of miles away, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's name was once again on the lips of everyday people. He had become, to many, a symbol of resistance, controversial to some, heroic to others, but undeniably influential. Debates erupted across homes, classrooms, religious centers, and open-air markets. Was he being unfairly targeted because of his political opinions and activism? Or was there a genuine case against him? Opinions differed sharply, but one thing was consistent. The people were paying attention, and they were invested. Back in Finland, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's legal team gathered at a modest law office not far from the courthouse. Their faces reflected both relief and exhaustion. The emotional weight of winning in court, especially against such heavy opposition and scrutiny, could not be overstated. Several members of the team were immigrants themselves, people who understood what it meant to straddle two worlds, to love one's homeland while building a life in a new country. They knew that Simon Nyoku Ekpa's case was not just about one man. It was about the broader issues of freedom of speech, digital activism, political persecution, and the responsibility of countries like Finland to uphold human rights while managing diplomatic relationships. Simon Nyoku Ekpa thanked the Finnish judiciary for their fairness and their refusal to be swayed by unreliable testimony. He extended gratitude to his legal team, who had worked tirelessly to defend him not just in legal terms, but in moral and political terms as well. Most importantly, he thanked his supporters, both in Finland and around the world, who had stood by him through weeks and months of anxiety, waiting, and uncertainty. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.